Hello, everyone. I'm Alejandra Trejo, professor at the Center for Demographic, Urban and Environmental Studies at El Colegio de Mexico in Mexico City. I'm also the chair of the RSA Latin American Division. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is organized by the Regional Studies Association. The RSA is a global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development, and policy. The association supports its members with the latest research, funding schemes, networking, and publishing opportunities and spaces to grow research and careers. As a response to the current global crisis, the RSA board put in place initiatives such as the Professional Development Seminar, which is this one, and the Regions and Cities Industry Webinar Series. You can also find more details on this on the RSA website. We also have a new app called RSA Hub that enables you to network and attend virtual events throughout the year. Before we start, just to let you know that this session will be recorded and will be made available on the website to watch and on the RSA Lounge for members. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will have time after the presentation to answer some of these, and also use the hashtag RSA webinar to tweet about the event. The Professional Development Seminar offers training and support for skills, knowledge, and professional development on a variety of topics, including this one on publishing. Today, our speaker will give us insights on publishing a book from idea to contract to print. So I'm very delighted to present Rob Kitchin. Rob is professor in Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute and Department of Geography. He was a European Research Council advanced investigator on the Programmable City project and a principal investigator on the Building City Dashboards project. He is the co-author and co-editor of more than 30 academic books and co-author of over 200 articles and book chapters. He has been an editor of Dialogues in Human Geography, Progress in Human Geography, and Social and Cultural Geography. He was the co-editor-in-chief of the International Encyclopedia of Human Geography. He was the 2013 recipient of the Royal Irish Academy's Gold Medal for the Social Sciences. So Robert, is over to you, please.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction. So I'm going to try and keep this relatively short so that there's plenty of time for people to be able to ask questions. And I'm just going to run through the basics really. And so just to give a kind of brief introduction, I mean, you'll know this intuitively, but writing a book is a big undertaking. It normally takes 1 or 2 years to complete. If you're trying to juggle other kinds of roles, such as your teaching and research and so on, it can take a while longer. So it's a very substantive project to invest time and effort into, and really needs quite a bit of careful thought as to whether you want to enter into it, and then what you are hoping to achieve through it, and whether you can realize those goals. Because it is such a big project, it's normally best to seek a publisher before you start. There's nothing worse than writing a book and then not being able to find somebody who's willing to publish the work. And nearly all academic books are produced this way. You write a book proposal, you get a publisher, and then you do the writing. So the first decisions really are, what type of book, what audience are you hoping to engage with, and what publisher is going to be best for that book. And I'm going to run through the answers to those kinds of questions. I think it's fair to say, though, that if you're an early career researcher and you're interested in publishing your PhD, that really beyond vanity presses, and very few publishers are interested in this. The problem with a PhD thesis is it's usually written for a very small audience, which is basically your supervisory committee and the examiners. It's a very formulaic piece of work. You tend to have kind of an introduction, a literature review, a methodology. You have some empirical chapters, a discussion, and a conclusion. There are very few books that have that structure and are written in that way. It's just too kind of staid, formulaic, and dull. And so if you are interested in publishing your PhD as a book, you either need to write the PhD as a book in the kind of format that you would expect of a book, or you have to rewrite it afterwards. And often the PhD is just too narrow. So it's like, you're saying a lot about a little, and books tend to be a little bit broader And so again, it's kind of widening out. So you just need to kind of keep that in mind. In terms of thinking about the type of book, so written or edited. So a written book might be a research monograph aimed principally at an academic audience, could be a trade monograph, which might be aimed more at a general audience or interested kind of lay readers as well as academic, or it could be a textbook, which is obviously pedagogic, aimed at either university students, or it might even be a school textbook. An edited book is obviously a collection of related essays, so pulling together various essays. It could be based around a particular research theme that might come out of a workshop or a conference where you pull together related papers that talk about a particular topic. It could be a textbook where each chapter is written by a different expert, but hopefully it has a coherence around a particular topic that people are likely to teach. It could be a handbook, which is kind of more high level, collection of chapters again around a particular theme, or it might be a reader, which is pulling together already published pieces of work, maybe editing them down to make them slightly shorter or more concise, and so on. And then there's the type of publishers that you might be interested in trying to work with. So there's the large academic publishers, so the kind of the Routledges, the Sage, the Elsevier, the Springers, and so on. Wiley will be another kind of big, large academic commercial press. It could be a more niche commercial press, so people like Pluto or Z Books that might be more focused on politics or on environment and so on. So they're normally publishing around just particular topics as opposed to having a very broad kind of set of works. Could be university presses that would typically be are more likely to publish kind of work of a fundamental knowledge nature, so they might not necessarily be so interested in the market and the size of the market. They obviously still want the book to sell and to turn a profit so they can keep operating, but they will have smaller margins. There's a trade press, so people like Penguin and Viking and so on that would that you would see in a high street bookshop, typically doing things like popular science, popular history, and so on. These are books where they're hoping to sell a large number of copies over lay readers. And it's a very different style of writing to academic books. It has to be accessible, it has to be engaging and lively, and so on. It's a different style of writing. And lastly, there's the vanity presses, which is basically you paying for your work to be published. And I would strongly urge anybody away from those vanity presses, because it just devalues your work. People won't take it seriously. I do think in relation to some of those publishers, you also need to think about things like the cost point. So increasingly, there's a number of publishers who are taking on large numbers of books, but they're pricing them at a kind of £100 or $100 plus, and therefore the readership is very low on it. So if you're wanting a kind of a larger audience, then you're going to have to maybe think about the university presses or the niche or the commercial presses in looking to try and get a paperback book at the kind of £30, $40 mark. And that might take a bit more effort, particularly if you're a first-time author, to persuade the publisher that you would have enough commercial potential to gain that kind of audience, and your book would be of sufficient interest to do that. Next is you've kind of worked out what book you want to do. You've worked out which audience you want, and then it's a question of approaching the publisher. Now, my advice would always be to approach the commissioning editor. So you can do that via email. You could phone them up, or you could visit the stand. So if you go to any large major conference like the Association of American Geographers or some of the Regional Studies Association events and so on, they'll have a book fair. And the commission editors typically go along to that. You can email them in advance and book a slot, or you can just turn up at the desk, and you can have a conversation with them and they'll tell you straight away whether they'll potentially be interested in the book. They might give you suggestions of how to maybe kind of tweak the proposal to make it of more interest and so on. And then you kind of submit the proposal to them. You only submit it once because this is going to go out to review. So you don't want to be wasting any referees' time, and you don't want to be wasting the publisher's time. So you don't send it to 10 publishers and then see which one comes back. You send it to each one in turn, starting with the one that you most want to work with. And then you have to remember that proposal is a sales pitch. So you are selling your project, and so you do need to pitch the proposal like that. And the proposal itself consists of a number of parts. So you'll have a prelims, which is basically your name, your affiliation, and so on. You'll have a rationale, which is typically 2 to 3 paragraphs about why this book is needed, and so on. You'll have a kind of content section where you roughly set out maybe 3 to 4 sentences or a short paragraph for each chapter. So whoever's reviewing the proposal will have a very good idea about what ultimately the book is going to say, and a sense of the structure and so on. Something about the format and style. So you know, how the book is going to be kind of pitched, what kind of, if it's a pedagogic book, what kind of learning devices are you going to use in the book, the kind of writing level. So is this written so that undergraduates will be able to kind of follow it, or is this a really high level monograph and it's really aimed at experts? A section around kind of audience, market and competition. So who do you think the readers are going to be? What do you think the market is going to be? Is this a market just for geography or just for regional studies, or is this a market that spills over into other disciplines, other fields? And what the competition is. So are there other books out there that are also in the same kind of space, and what differentiates your book from their book, and why will your book will sell given the competition that's there? Something about timetable. So when you think you'd be able to deliver the manuscript, this has to be realistic. There's no point saying I'm going to deliver in a year if realistically it's going to be 2 to 3. The publisher needs to know this because they have to schedule their production processes in advance. They schedule their copy editors and so on in advance. They're scheduling their catalogues and the information that goes in the catalogue and so on. So they want a good idea about when things are going to be delivered. And it's also around them being able to plan their budgets and so on. Then something about the author, something about you, why you're the right person to write this, what your track record is, some evidence that you'll actually be able to deliver the book. So some evidence that you've already got some written work, whether that's papers or book chapters or whatever. Typically, the proposal will be 8 to 10 pages, so it's quite brief. You don't want to kind of overload the reviewers or overload the commission editor. They want to be able to read it quite quickly and get a good impression and make a decision based on that. Typically, it might go out to 3, 4, up to, could be anywhere up to 8 people might look at the proposal. It will typically be less than that. You can give suggestions as who you think might be a good reviewers. The commission editor might go with that. They'll also pick their own and so on. Then just if they like the proposal, it will go off to an editing commission who will look at the reviews and make the decision, and then they'll come back to you and they'll offer you a contract. The contract typically has got 20 to 30 clauses in it, all about various rights and obligations and conditions and so on. So there's kind of rights and responsibilities on your side, there's rights and responsibilities on their side, and it basically just sets out how things like the royalties will work, how things like legal disputes over the contract work, and so on. You need to read it really carefully because you need to know what you're signing up for. So don't just sign it and send it back. See what's in it. If there's a clause in there that you're not happy with or you're unsure about, then you just query it, and you can negotiate. So there's two clauses that I always get removed from my contracts, and nobody has ever objected to me removing them. The first one is that that I commit to my next book being published by that publisher. So I'm committing, or at least they have first refusal on my next book. I'm not going to do that until I know whether I'm happy with them and whether I can trust them. So I asked for that clause to be removed, and I asked for the clause that says if they want to do a second edition of the book and I'm not prepared to do it, that they can get somebody else to do it. So I want to be the only person who rewrites or extends my work. I don't want somebody else doing it. So I always ask for that clause to be removed, and they always remove it. And never sign a contract until you know what you're committing to and you're happy with. Once you've got the contract out of the way, then it's down to writing the book. And there's a number of kind of things that you need to do. So obviously one of them is to actually write the book, to make the time to get the words on the screen. And you really do need to try and meet the deadlines. Like if you want to build a working relationship with a publisher, they need to know that you're kind of, you're trustworthy and you do deliver. So you're meeting the deadlines, keeping them informed. So if something comes along that knocks your schedule out, and it might be for a perfectly good reason, then you just tell them, look, I'm going to be 2 months late, or I'm going to be 6 months late. This is the reason why, and so on. You'll also have to do stuff like marketing questionnaires and so on. So they'll send you material that you need to fill out to help them market and sell the book. Once the book's been submitted and it's been accepted, so it might go out for review again once the manuscript has been submitted. So just to go back to the proposal, you might also be asked to submit, if it's your first book or you're an early career scholar, you might be asked to submit 1 or 2 draft chapters with the proposal, so they get an idea of your your writing and how the book is pitched and so on. But the book manuscript, when in full, when it's submitted, might go out for review, and that would typically happen with a university press who have much higher thresholds around quality, that they'll send it out for review. Once it's been accepted though and it's gone into production, you'll get copy edit queries. You might be asked to do the index, or you can pay for somebody else to do the index. There'll be questions around the book cover. There'll be questions around who might write blurbs endorsing the book, and so on. There could be the text for the back of the book, and then there'll be stuff around promotion. And so increasingly publishers are getting authors to do things like podcasts and so on. So those kinds of things to kind of support the publication of the book, or do media interviews and so on. Okay, so I'm gonna end at that point and open it up for questions. I do have a kind of a proposal that I can show people if people want to see kind of roughly what a proposal looks like.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Rob, for your presentation. I think it is very useful for some discussion and questions. We don't see any yet. Yes, we have one. Neil Lee, how much can you change the structure argument between the proposal and submission?
Yeah, so the book is always going to evolve, because you go off and do extra reading, you often do extra thinking, and you might feel that it's beneficial to the book to restructure it, and I think that's fine. You should talk to the commission editors to let them know what you're doing, and let them approve that. And you might have a bit of negotiation about that, but they're expecting the book to shift. They don't expect a kind of it to remain quite kind of static.
Thank you. Another question from Alison Odenthal. What makes a good proposal that really stands out from others? The example you mentioned would be helpful.
So I think you need a really clear rationale. So you need a really clear rationale as to why this book, why now, why you're the right person to write it, and to be able to demonstrate that you think that there is a market. Now, depending on what publisher you're going with, the market will vary, you know. So, you know, university presses are not expecting to sell thousands of copies of books. They're looking to sell hundreds of copies of books. But they need to be convinced that they will get their investment back. So that they are investing money, you know, they're investing in their staff costs, you know, in their production costs, in the copy editing, the proofing, the indexing, all that kind of stuff. You know, so they basically want to, whoever's reading the proposal needs to be convinced that it's a book that's needed. So that's the clearest thing, is to kind of point out the gap that you're going to fill, or how you're going to create a kind of a new, you know, a kind of a new space. So I think that's the key thing, and why you're the right person to write it. Like, it is a sales pitch. Now you can kind of oversell. So if I'm reviewing proposals, sometimes I kind of say, well, this is kind of being oversold. So it's kind of being realistic, I think, as well. But remembering it is a sale, you know, it is a pitch. I don't know if that's answered the question.
Thank you, Rob. We have more questions. What is the role of an editor? What makes a good editor? Am I stuck with an editor, or can I change him, her on the way?
Yeah, so I mean, there are different types of editors within the publisher. So you'll mainly be dealing with a commissioning editor at the beginning, and they're basically the people who look after the list. So they might be looking after the geography list, or the regional studies list, or the politics list, or whatever. So they'll have a kind of an area that they'll be making decisions on whether to commission those books, and then they will shepherd those books into delivery. Once it's been delivered, it shifts off to a production editor who does something else. Now, in university presses, the editor is likely to be hands-on, and they might read bits of the proposal. They'll certainly get it reviewed, and they'll synthesize the reviews and give you feedback. But you're unlikely to get development editing, where, you know, somebody is giving it a really close read and kind of proofing it and maybe making editorial changes. You might have got that 30, 40 years ago, but just the way the publishing industry has gone, they're expecting you to deliver the polished manuscript more. So the kind of review back will be from people who are reviewing the manuscript, which will be other academics rather than the editor. The key role of the editor for you, though, is they're your advocate inside the company. So if they're really keen on the book, they will argue for a stronger marketing budget. They'll argue more for you to maybe get a full page in the brochure or a half page in the brochure rather than just a small text box in the brochure. They'll be the person making sure your book is more high profile with the cover facing out at a book stand, as opposed to just on a bookshelf or in a pile. So they're your advocates. So if you can develop a good relationship with an editor, and I've tended to try to stick to editors in the past, and I've followed editors from publishers. So when editors move from one publisher to another, I've followed them because I think that the person gives me good advice and has been a good advocate for my book. So that's how I see the key role of an editor.
Thank you. That was from Sabine Jury.
Yeah.
Another one from Neil Lee. I think this is very interesting. What's your process for actually writing the book once you have a contract?
Yeah.
Any tips for getting the words on paper?
Yeah, like the only way a book gets written is if you write it. And, so yeah, I'm a believer of just sitting in front of the computer and writing and trying to just make a start. Like it's, I mean, some people procrastinate, some people kind of get writer's block, or they're not quite sure where to start. I think you just have to find ways of kind of dealing with that. Maybe start with the sections where you've all maybe written in the past, and you can kind of rework the material, or where you feel most comfortable, or you can kind of sketch out the notes and then convert the notes into text. I'm probably not the right person to ask, in that I don't really have problems writing, and it's not very modest, but I typically write 500 to 1,000 words a day most days. So where I have time, where I'm not messing around with admin or teaching or whatever. So and I don't write linearly. So I don't write like starting chapter 1, then chapter 2. I can quite happily write 3 sentences in chapter 3, and then a paragraph in chapter 1, and then 2 paragraphs in chapter 5, and then a sentence in the conclusion, and then keep swapping it. So when I write a book, it all finishes at the same time, as opposed to each chapter in sequence. So and that way I can kind of keep momentum on the writing, and I'm also editing while writing, so the two kind of go together. So I think it's just trying to find a writing strategy that works for you, and I can kind of write in gaps. So if I've got 5 minutes between things, I'll just swap and write, write a little bit, because I've been thinking about, something's been mulling over in the back of my head, and I'll just try and get the notes out. So it's difficult, because I just know from mentoring other people, that people have different, in the same way that people have different learning styles, they have different writing styles, they have different ways in which they come to the material. And the key thing is just to find the one that works best for you. And you can only really do that by playing around. If you can get a mentor who you can kind of bounce ideas off of, in terms of writing ideas off of, that might help. Or talk to a different colleagues about how they go about doing it, and then try each of them out and find out which one works best for you. But people definitely write in different ways.
Thank you. We still have time for some questions. Francesca Blanc, could you suggest some publishers that publish in both English and Spanish? Are there any?
I personally don't know, because typically the way that my work has been translated is through the sale of the translation rights. So Alejandra is probably better off answering this question than me. You probably have more experience of dual language publication, or at least publishing Spanish and into English.
Yeah, sometimes publishers have like a commissioner for translating, but so they give the rights to a local company, a local publisher to translate, as far as I know. And I think there are some, Peter Lang maybe has this, because I know some people that has published in Spanish and in English.
Yeah, I think you're really looking for sale of translation rights, unless you can come to an agreement with the publisher yourself, where you're doing the translation, and they can be convinced that there's a dual market. So where I don't know, the first half of the book it's in English, and the second half of the book it's in Spanish. I don't know any example. I can't think of any examples of a book like that, but or now things are going more open access, and there are funds sometimes within grants to pay for publication. They might be more open for that if you're absorbing the translation cost and they're not. So because you're effectively paying for the book. An open access book is typically 10 to 12,000 pounds sterling with a UK publisher. I don't know what it is for other publishers, but if you're paying that amount of money, they might give you a bit more editorial control in terms of the language content.
Yes, thank you. We still have a couple of questions, so we will overrun slightly. There is one question from Lexi Holmes. Is there an expected format for final manuscript, or is all the formatting done by the publisher?
Well, generally, you you want to hand over the manuscript in, obviously all the structure and everything that you want it in, they will do all the typesetting into whatever the series book formatting is. And the best thing you can do to help them with that is to follow the format. When you sign a contract, they will give you a kind of a notes for contributors, a note for authors kind of booklet that will actually tell you, how it should be structured, how it should be formatted, what format the references should be in, and so on. And you basically follow that. In terms of the actual typesetting of the final book, that's done by the professional typesetters.
Thank you. We still have a couple more questions. Daniela Card, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Could you have any insights on how book royalties work?
Yeah, so the book royalties, royalties have been going down now for a while, and they've been shifting from gross to net. So, so say the book sold for £15, the publisher will probably get about £7 or £8 of that. So, depending on the distributor and the bookshop, the publisher will be getting kind of between 35 and between 65 and 50% of the cover price, and you'll be getting like 7.5% of that, and so on. So if a £15 book and you're getting 17.5% royalties, you're probably getting 50p per book, something like that. The royalties work differently on written books versus edited books, and they might have a step change in it. There's very few publishers now, I think, publish above 10% royalties. A lot of them are offering 7.5% royalty, but it will go up depending on number of copies. So if you sell 1,000 copies, then it might go up to 12%. If it goes to a second print run, it might go up to 14%, and so on. Edited books typically might be anywhere from 0.5% to 5%. The margins on those books are much lower. They typically sell much less, and so on. So it's difficult to negotiate on royalties unless you have any kind of track record, and even then it's difficult. And then there's all kinds of other royalties around translation rights, film rights, e-books versus print books, and so on. So there's a whole bunch of them. And you can query any of them. I've certainly queried them. I have managed to get them altered slightly, but altered slightly, I mean like going from 7.5% to 10%, or from 10% to 12% or something. And it might be on some of the sub clauses. I think one of the last books I did, the electronic rights were lower than the book published rights, and I argued to get them the same. But yeah, it's quite difficult negotiating around them. But particularly if you don't have a track record. But even if you do, they'll. A lot of the publishers, if you talk to them, will tell you that they don't really make a lot of money on books. Where they make the money is on journal subscriptions, and often that side of the publishing house is subsidizing the other. And a lot of books don't sell very many. So that's the other, many copies. So that's the other kind of subsidization going on. So kind of 10% of books are 90% of sales.
Yeah. Maybe the very last question. This is a question I wanted to ask. Do you have any strategies for keeping contributors on track when you are editing a volume?
Yes, which is mainly badgering them. And but actually being very clear at the start about what's expected and what deadlines there are and why, and making it clear that if you're the person who's last, it's you that's disrupting everybody else, and you don't really want to be that person. You don't want the bad reputation. But yeah, it can be really, really difficult. And I mean, I've done things like it also makes a difference whether the book is commission chapters or whether it's so like a research book. you might have like 15 people from a workshop who've all said they're going to submit a chapter, and if a chapter disappears, it doesn't matter to the overall coherency of the book. Whereas if it's an edited textbook where each of the chapters has been specially commissioned, if that chapter is missing, then there's going to be a problem and somebody else has to write it. So that's a difference. And I have done on like, say, like an edited textbook, I've had to write the chapter that somebody else was going to write just to keep the book on track. Because I don't want all the other authors to suffer because one person has decided they're going to run their own timetable. And so, yeah, I will actually kick people off of projects. I mean, I'll let them know in advance, if you haven't delivered this, you're already a year late, and if you're not going to deliver in the next 3 months, then I'm actually just going to cut you loose. So they know that that's coming. I mean, I'm on the other side at the minute. I've got like 3 edited book chapters written and submitted, and they've been submitted for like 3 years plus at this stage, and I suspect the books are never going to come out. And it's basically because either the editor is not doing their job or the other authors never delivered. And it's incredibly frustrating because they're kind of 3 wasted chapters who kind of, which are all now out of date. So yeah, it's about trying to get them to be good citizens and explaining that they need to be good citizens. And being very clear when you're signing them up what you're expecting. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob. I think no more questions. So thank you, Rob, for your fantastic presentations and tips and answers. Also, thank you to the RSA team for organizing this event, and everyone, the attendees, for participating and for your questions. The last thing is to invite you to the next session, which will take place on October 6th, with a topic, the imposter syndrome, why successful people feel like frauds. More information and free registration can be found on the RSA website, where you can also find information on memberships, events, publications, and grants. So thank you again, and goodbye.